hand for Lester St. Louis, please. Hi, everybody. I love it. I'm Cindy Stivers, class of 1978, and yay, 78! So it's not a big reunion year for us, but it actually always is a big reunion year, right? And yes, I'm also a proud member of the Board of Trustees. And I wanted to tell you the story very briefly of how the Moth came to Barnard originally. When I was an undergrad, one of my 15 part-time jobs on campus was, I'm only slightly exaggerating, was in the Alumnae Affairs office in the days of Irma Moore, who I have not seen, but she's often here, so yes, big applause for Irma Moore. Love Irma Moore. And we realized that the most amazing thing for Barnard alums was to tell stories about, when I was on campus, and I was fascinated as a young student hearing all of these stories of days gone by. So fast forward to turn of the century, and I'm chairing Reunion, which Mary Rosenberg, my classmate, is now doing. Thank you, Mary. And discovered that nothing had changed. Barnard alums still loved hearing, the older ones loved hearing from the younger ones, and vice versa. And right around that time, there was this great new organization called the Moth that was just becoming really popular. And my staff at Time Out New York was always telling me about it, so I started going to shows, and then lo and behold, Istar Swager, class of 1968, appears to say, hey, I know these guys. So thank you, Istar, because she was the connection. And I looked it up, it was 2004, was the first Moth show, so this is the 12th one. The first one had a really amazing host. It's one of the few Barnard alums you can recognize with your eyes closed, Susan Stamberg, right? And it was really, like you will hear, and has been ever since, stories of alums talking about their roommates they loved, advisors they loved, faculty who made a huge impression on them, and and also historical figures they had a brush with in some cases on campus. One woman talked about Malcolm X making his last public speech in the gym the day before he was killed. And the one that kills me still, there was, in 2004, a woman who was 98 years old. She was here for her 75th reunion. And she was telling us about how this young woman had come to campus, a political activist, and was talking about how important it was to really get out there and exercise the recently hard-won right to vote. And that woman had grown up to be Eleanor Roosevelt. So because this is Barnard, we always have to do things better and improve on ourselves. So therefore, this year at the Moth, we have a professional host. And I'm here to introduce Ophira Eisenberg, who, has anyone listened, do you listen to Ask Me Another on NPR? I thought you might. She's also the author of a memoir called Screw Everybody, Sleeping My Way to Monogamy. So, big round for Ophira Eisenberg.
Good afternoon. How about a hand for Cindy Stivers for a wonderful opening? Welcome to this great afternoon performance, The Moth at Barnard College. I'm very lucky to be here. My mere presence here actually devalues the college, but I'm very pleased to be here with some amazing storytellers. I know that actually before we even go one second further, I just want to make sure, it's a little bit of housekeeping, that everybody has their cell phones on silent, preferably off. Why not? Why don't we just pretend this is the only thing you're doing right now? How about that? Yeah. Let's go back in time when you had friends, not followers, you know? Remember when you looked down and just saw the ground? Fantastic. So yeah, I love that. I went to McGill University. Really? You don't have to do that, Barnard, really. We, at McGill, I was in Montreal, if you don't know, I'm Canadian. We walk amongst you undetected, but at McGill, we always used to call McGill Harvard of the North. And then I realized very recently, Harvard never refers to itself as McGill of the South, ever. So that was McGill, we did that just for ourselves. And as I stand here as someone who moved to New York to pursue stand-up comedy and then ended up with a job hosting a trivia comedy show for public radio and doing a lot of work with the Moth, I have a degree that fed into that, specifically cultural anthropology. You can tell I'm now working in subcultures, but when I actually have a cultural anthropology degree, and then it became a cultural anthropology degree and a theater degree, a joint. Because my idea was take the theater, and if that doesn't work out, I can always fall back on the cultural anthropology. So welcome, the Moth. How many people here? I take it many people are familiar with the Moth. By a round of applause. Yes, fantastic. Many of you have been to this event before, but if you are new to it, let me just tell you what the Moth is. The Moth is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to the art and craft of storytelling. People come up here and tell true stories from their lives, live on stage. There's no notes. It is just, expressing something that was important from your life that we all then somehow take something from, whether it relates to a specific moment that we have enjoyed, but always you travel to somewhere that brings everyone together and it creates an intimate community just through the art of telling a story. And here we are going to do a live performance. You may be familiar with the Moth podcast or the radio show. It is a radio show nationwide. The podcast is downloaded over 17 million times a year. The Moth, since I have come to it, which is now 10 years ago, has awards. It has a MacArthur grant. It has a Peabody Award. It now has live performances not only across the country, but across the world in Australia and the UK. All of this because this simple thing of us talking to each other about our lives is one of the most powerful things anyone could ever experience. And I came to the Moth because I moved to New York from Canada. I had a lot of jokes in my stand-up act that were long stories, and at the time, nobody wanted to listen to that, and it was actually deemed very female to talk like that. And so, which is ridiculous. So I was told, though, that there was this cool thing happening in the Lower East Side called the Moth. And I went to it, and I sat through a story slam, it's the open mic series of the Moth. Anyone can come tell a story. There's 10 people that are picked per evening, but if you just had an idea, there's themes like betrayal or love or green, and you just put your name in the hat if you have a 5-minute true story about that. And I got up and told a story. It did not go well at all, but I was hooked, because that's the kind of person I am. I was like, wow, I smell failure in my future. Let's keep going. And I kept going, and I will tell you, obviously I'm just so happy that I got to be part of the organization, but also the people that I met through the storytelling world are my best friends, still to this day, and I think it's because we felt that first day when we heard each other tell stories that we were like, oh, I understand you, or I already know so much about you, we can skip right to the second level of our friendship, because that's what storytelling does. So we are going to have 3 storytellers this afternoon. The way this works is that the Alumni Committee and the Moth Reunion Committee asked for essays about people's experience, and they got a huge amount of submissions. From that, 3 were chosen to come up here. It was a very tough decision, and obviously wanted a span of different times, so we have someone from class of 61, 91, and 96. And if you are into numbers, that is a very satisfying 3 numbers, 61, 91, and 96. It's beautiful. They will be coming up here and telling a 7-minute true story from their life to do with our theme, which is It All Comes Back to Barnard. Memories from your time at Barnard that have stayed with you forever. And we say 7 minutes, that's a thing with the Moth. We do stories that have a time limit. And Lester here is going to be hanging out on stage, not just for eye candy, no. Also, Lester is going to act as our timekeeper. So the storyteller, has roughly 7 minutes. They'll be telling their story at the 7-minute mark or so. Lester will let them know by playing a little something on the cello. You want to give me an example? Oh, yeah. It's beautiful. Right? Sort of like angels, but realistic angels, yeah? And that will just be a cue for the storyteller to know where they are. It's time to wrap up their story. If for whatever reason, they go on and on. They are sort of lost in the moment, or they're trying to find the ending, but it is far away. A few minutes later, Lester will give them a more aggressive note. Something like... That is subtle but effective. I like it. I love this convention. I really wish I could have someone like Lester just follow me around in real life. Like, wouldn't that be great? Like at a department meeting where you're like, whoa, wrap it up, Just Lester being like, and you're like, yeah, Lester said, wrap it up, 1 more minute. So we're gonna get things started in a minute. I should mention too, my name is Ophira Eisenberg. It's the name I was actually given to me when I got a public radio job. No. It is a real name. And Ophira, particularly, even today, I was actually, I'm a new mother, and I was at my first, thanks. Yeah, I know. It's my first one. I'm old, I get it. When I was pregnant, I was considered both high risk and an inspiration. But I was just at my first birthday party of another baby, which is I'm waiting to write that hour show. But again, I just didn't know a lot of people, and we all now know each other through our children's names, and I explained my name 100 times because it is odd, and someone just kept hammering me like, Ophira, I've never heard that before. Why have I never heard that before? You know why? Because everyone's kids have pretty interesting names too. We just went with Lucas, but there were some names that there was a Hercules. Anyways, it's fine. I kind of like it, but it's, I was the odd one growing up with Ophira in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Trust me, I stuck out, and no one knew that name. So just so you know, it is a very, very old Israeli name that didn't catch on. That's why you have not heard of it. That is why you have not heard of it. So, our alumni for this afternoon, they have bios in our programs. They are amazing people, but at the Moth, by way of introduction, we do not do a classic sort of like, they've done this and this. What we do is we ask a question to do something with our theme, and we ask them to answer it, and that's how I bring them up. So because our theme is It All Comes Back to Barnard, I was thinking about people that are just coming to Barnard for the first time. So I asked each of our storytellers, what piece of advice would you give to someone that is just entering Barnard? And our first storyteller said, get a good night's sleep. There's a lot of people in agreement. She likes to get up at 4:30 a.m. Yeah, I know, that is impressive. That's almost like a stunt to be able to do that. It's like, wow. But she said it's amazing because if you get up that early, you find out that there are actually birds singing, even in the city. Not just pigeons fighting, birds singing, my friends. Please welcome our first storyteller from the class of '61, Judith Stitzel.
I graduated from Barnard in 1961, 55 years ago. And a story has been coming back to me during those 55 years. I came to Barnard, I was 16 in 3 months. Very young, still catching up with myself. I was a commuter student. That really wasn't too difficult. I had gone to Hunter College High School, so I was used to the bus and the train. I was a good student, if by that you mean got good grades. But at Barnard, grades were the least of it. People were so accomplished. Some of them sang, and they joined the chorus or the choir, and some of them danced, and they joined dance groups and theater, and some of them did archery on the roof. Believe me, they really did. There was archery on the roof, and some of them were very athletic, and they were comfortable in the gym with Miss Strang, and Miss Strang was 7 feet tall. I could not do any of those things. I could talk. I liked to talk. And I could think. I loved to think. And fellow students and I, we would go to a place I don't think exists anymore. It's called the Annex. It was like a corner of Barnard Hall. And we would talk about really important things. We would talk about God and whether he existed when he was still a he. And we talked about the good and the beautiful and ethics and honor. And so perhaps it wasn't odd that when I heard about the honor board, I thought, this could be for me. You know, that was serious. And they talked and they thought. I think there still is an honor board. It holds the honor code, and the honor code upholds Barnard and the integrity. And it also deals with cheating, and it deals with plagiarism. And it's a very serious kind of business. And I felt I could contribute, maybe be a little bit more comfortable at Barnard. And we met in this horrendously ugly room. It was in the corner of Barnard Hall. And the windows were filthy, and the table was scratched, and the linoleum was linoleum. And it was really very conducive to seriousness. And I liked the work. I felt I was good. We heard cases. I think we called them cases. And you know, and we tried to be fair and hoped that people would turn themselves in. And sometimes that happened. It did. And then somewhere along the line, I was asked to consider running for the president. And I thought, no, I don't think so. I mean, I was flattered, but I don't. But I couldn't quite say no to it. So I asked the people who might be helpful, and I asked my boyfriend, and he said, well, he thought that I could do it if I wanted to. And I asked a family friend of who was an academic, and he said, well, did I want to? I said, well, I wasn't really a leader in high school. I was friends with the leaders. I knew how to do that, but not a leader. So he said, well, I really think you can if you want to. And then suddenly I wanted to. And very soon after that, I realized that I would be running against Susan. Susan lived on campus. She was blonde. She was very pretty. She was comfortable with herself in a way that I was not comfortable with myself. And I was not comfortable with her being comfortable. And later, I realized that one of the names for that is envy. And at the time, all I knew is I wanted to beat her. that there was kind of a culture in honor board that if you won this election, you would offer the secretary position, which was also very important to the other person. Well, I didn't want to do that. I mean, why should I do that? I mean, that was so much against the spirit of the deliberate way in which we did things on the honor board. And as odd as that was, as I look back on it, I had this perversely honorable idea that I should tell her that before the election. Now, I wasn't sure how I was going to do that, because where would I see her exactly? But, you know, as luck would have it, or the opposite of luck, I saw her on Jake. Some of you may remember, it's not there anymore. They don't call it Jake. It was the center of Barnard Hall. There was that big bank of mailboxes, maybe some of you remember. There were holes and then pegs. And if you got mail, the pegs were in the holes. And if you got lots of pegs in the holes, you were very popular. It was an amazing place. And there was Susan. And I called her over and I said, Susan, can I talk to you? And she said, yes. And I said, well, Susan, I think I just need to tell you, you know, that, well, you see, the reason why I had to do this was because, as I told you, you know, there was this kind of, you know, well, I didn't want her to win, but I said, you know, that if I win, I didn't say when I win, I said, if I win, I just don't think I can offer the position automatically to you. It would just, you know, sort of go against everything. And I kept waiting for her to maybe ask me for some further explanation, and she said, oh, okay, let's wait and see. And she turned, and she walked away. And I knew the next meeting was going to be awkward. The election was held. Susan won. I lost. I knew I'd have to see her again. I didn't know how, but as luck would have it, we met again on Jake. And she said, Judy, can I talk to you for a minute? And I thought, okay, you asked for it. And she came over, and she said, Judy, I'd like to offer you the position of secretary. Huh. Would you like that? Yes, I thought. Oh, yes, I would like that. A lot. So I said, yes. And I didn't say, sorry, I was such an idiot. And I didn't say, thank you. So that incident has come back for 55 years, intersecting with different periods in my own life. As the evidence increases that self-consciousness, lack of confidence, insecurity, immaturity, which I have found reappears frequently over a lifespan, narrowness, that those all hide behind. They hide behind the mask of arrogance, stupidity, occasionally, I'm happy to say, not too often, cruelty. And sometimes that behavior is met with graciousness, kindness, openness, a cello. And what I can only call grace. And I want to say to Susan, if she's here, wherever she is, to all the Susans in my life, I'm sorry for being such a jerk. Thank you. And in that, I hope there is some honor.
Judith setting the bar high. That was so fantastic. I'm a little teary-eyed just because there were so many great things that just happened on stage. One more time for Judith Stitzel, everybody. I'm mad at Susan. I'm still mad at Susan. I don't like Susan. If Susan's here, I love this line, and I will think about this, and I'm going to try at some point to insert it into my life. I don't know what the premise will be, but I would love to say to someone, because that would go against everything. So, the timing on that, unbelievable. Some improv that happened. And it's interesting. It just made me think, because you were like, I was never a leader in high school. Clearly, you are a leader in so many ways. I don't even know exactly what you do per se, but I know you are just by hearing you. And I always think, actually, in junior high, all of my friends got taken away to something called leadership camp. And I remember I did not. And I was very upset about that, and I remember saying it to my sister, telling my sister when I was at home how upset I was, and she said, "Don't worry about it, these are the kinds of things you never remember later." Then it all came round when I moved to New York now 12 years ago, and one of the jobs I did to make extra money, because I didn't have any, moved to New York, no money, is I used to do like product opinions, where you basically give your opinions on soap, or I did a Dove soap one. It was for, they were trying to make a drink, like to see if you would drink a Dove product if you were told that it would make your skin better. Yeah, you're welcome, that didn't make it to the market. Like, no. But I would do all these sort of consumer support and feedback things. For money, you get paid $200. And I did one that was for a lot of money. It ended up being for like $600. It was for a cell phone company. Now, again, this is like almost 10 years ago. So cell phone companies were still competing, and they were like really trying to figure out how people were using them. And every stage, if you passed and were deemed an important person that they wanted your opinion, you would get another $100. And I made it to the final stage, and I remember, again, it was like the crappiest video game of all time. I mean, I just needed money, and we're talking about cell phones. They were like, "What are your cell phone habits?" And it just came to me that they were like, "You're the person that cares about cost." Which you care about cost when you're broke, because that's all you care about, you know? You don't buy the expensive toilet paper, you steal it. So, and we were put into teams, and I remember in this little consumer support, support and feedback thing, the woman saying to me, "You will be team leader, and you will get $400 for that." And I remember at that moment I thought, "Ha! That person back in junior high was wrong, because in this moment, while I am doing a survey for Verizon in a midtown, like weird office that has the kind of carpet that they usually have in dog kennels, this other person has deemed me a leader." Now, I went into a final thing, and it was me as a leader against another person that was a leader. And I will tell you, my boyfriend at the time and I were both trying to do these support things, and one of the major problems in our relationship, according to him, why we wouldn't get married, married, according to him, because I asked him one day, why won't you marry me? I'm very really into passive-aggressive nuptials. And he said because we argue too much, which of course started an argument, and we ended up in this thing where I was team leader and they trotted him in as team leader because we were both doing the same thing. And they said, you're lawyers, pretend you're lawyers, and you're going to be arguing against each other about cell phone usage. You're arguing cost, and he will be arguing that coverage is the most important thing. We had to pretend we didn't know each other, and they were like, and whoever wins gets an extra $200. And we were like, this is amazing, because we know how to argue, right? We had like rhythm, we had moves, like we knew how to do it. We had all the, we were patting our brows, like we were at some courtroom in the South, doing our fake lawyer thing. And we made our points and big closing arguments. It was ridiculous, but at the end they were like, okay, we've come to a decision. You guys are both so great, so you're both gonna get $200 extra. We were like, oh my God, and then there was pause, and I was like, but if you had to decide, because whoever won this would win from now on in the relationship. And they're like, no, you both were great. It's, they're like, it's a Verizon, consumer survey, just take the money and go. And we're like, but you heard everything. If you had to pick one person that at least was the most articulate, and they're like, just go home. And they gave us $700 in American Express gift cards each, and we left. We had to pretend we didn't know each other, and then we left the building. We're like, oh my God, because collectively, we were bringing to our little apartment, my boyfriend and I, $1,400. That was a huge amount of money. And with that money, we joked around how arguing had finally paid off. And we went out for one of the best dinners I think I've still ever had in New York, because it was probably the first dinner that we just felt like we could just get whatever we wanted. And then we saved the rest of the money, and a year later, we used it for wedding invitations. True story. All right, our next storyteller, when I asked her, what would you tell someone coming to Barnard, a little piece of advice, she said, take more risks. She said, think about when you have a choice, what will you remember in 25 years? And I asked, well, do you have an example? Well, she did. She said, I remember having to make a decision between, will I go to class, or will I catch Dustin Hoffman as Shylock on Broadway? What did she choose? Of course, Dustin Hoffman, and skipped class. So that is a success story right there, taking risks. From the class of '91, please welcome our next storyteller, Ruth Abusch-Magder, everybody.
So, arriving at Barnard was a revelation for me. I grew up in Canada, where for the most part, going for higher education is a more utilitarian and commuter affair. So not only did Barnard have dorms, but they had amazing variety of classes and people, and they had exotic things like orientation. I was in heaven. I knew I'd found my place. This is where I needed to be, where I was meant to be. So I was really excited to be here. I had transferred in, and everything was going extraordinarily well until October. And I realized in October that I had a big, big problem. The problem was taking the form of a pile of books. That pile of books was mounting in size, just growing and growing all the time, and it was sitting there in the middle of my room. That pile of books represented every single book that I had been assigned since the beginning of the year. And I hadn't read one of them. Now, midterms were approaching, and I knew that if I didn't read these books, I'd been surviving on the articles and class discussion until that point, but if I didn't read these books, I was not going to pass my exams at all. I would fail out of Barnard and lose this place that I loved so much. And I was really beside myself. Now, my whole life, I'd been told that I was a little lazy, I was an underachiever, and I didn't apply myself. But I knew in this case, that wasn't what was the core of the problem, because I wanted to be here more than anything. I really wanted to succeed here, and yet, when it came to those books, I wasn't doing anything about it. So I was 19, and I was really smart and full of knowledge, and especially about mental health, because my father's a psychiatrist and my mother's a psychologist. That means that I almost have a degree. And I did an assessment and realized that there was no logical conclusion to come to about my problem other than I was having a mental breakdown. So I'll let you in on a secret. If you go to the health services and tell them you're having a mental breakdown, they will see you immediately. So I walk into the therapist's office. I don't remember anything about her, except I do remember the conversation. So I only had one symptom in my mental breakdown, which was these books, and I explained that to her. And she said, okay, tell me a little bit more about you and reading. This wasn't exactly what I expected, but I told her that she wanted to know when I learned to read. I said, well, of course they taught me in first grade, but are you thinking about picture books? I like picture books. She's like, no, novels. Well, maybe third grade I sort of got there. Well, actually, I explained, I hadn't read a single book that they had assigned to us in high school. It's actually very doable. Well, then she asked me a little bit about math, which, I just assumed because as a woman, I wasn't any good at, but I just wasn't any good at. Turns out that's not actually true. And she asked me about spelling, which, well, I can't spell either. So at the end of this assessment, she said to me, you are not having a mental breakdown. I was still sure she was wrong, but when she said, you have a learning disability, I really had no idea what to make of it. It was 1989. The concept was completely foreign to me. The only kinds of disabilities I knew anything about were wheelchairs or hearing impairments or visual impairments. I was able-bodied. This was beyond anything in my experience. I'd never heard of it. But I was really terrified that I was going to lose everything I'd found at Barnard. So when she suggested that I go to the Office of Disability Services, I went there right away that very day. Of course, I did need her to write it out with very clear instructions and a map, because I couldn't get from the health services to Barnard Hall without getting lost. But then, so I went there right away that day, and I walked into the Disability Services office, and they said, sure, we'll go in and see Dean Marstellers. Does anybody here remember her? Yeah. So for those of you who didn't have the honor of knowing her, she was bright and funny and generous and kind. She was a Barnard woman. But when I walked into her office that day, all I saw was her disability. She was racked with MS and her body was twisted. She was in a wheelchair and her speech was slurred. The thought that that's what a disability was, and maybe I have one, was really unnerving, and I didn't know what to make of it. But it wasn't as unnerving as the idea that I would lose being at Barnard. So I told her my story about the books and the health services, and she listened to my whole story, which I had begun with saying, you're going to think I'm crazy. And so she said, at the end, she said, you're not crazy. You have a learning disability. Normally, she said, you're going to need a lot of testing before we'll give you even the basic services. But in your case, I think we're going to make an exception. And it was a good thing she did, because almost immediately, I began to get help, and things began to change. That winter, I read for the first time the Canadian classic Anne of Green Gables. It was a book I'd always wanted to read, but had never been able to do by myself. I went on to do a lot of good academic work here at Barnard. I also got involved in disability awareness and advocacy, working with other classmates who had physical and learning disabilities. I would go on and get a PhD and a rabbinical degree, which involved reading many more books than any person should ever read. Now, the disability never went away. I still stand before you, I don't read fiction because it's just too hard for my brain to process. I can listen, but not read it. I still can't remember numbers, including simple things like my children's birthdays, which drives them crazy. And I'm a rabbi, and I can't think of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I can't pull Jacob out of my mind without doing Abraham and Isaac first. So there's still some really serious problems, but I've managed to do things that I didn't ever expect. I would go on in my time at Barnard to have many more exceptional days, wonderful days, good days, but none transformed my life quite as much as that day. I saw the world in a completely different way after that day. I understood the concept of disability in a completely different way and saw ability even when there is disability. I understood it about myself, and I began to open up doors and options that just could never have been without Barnard.
Ruth Abusch-Magder, everybody. Another incredible story. And I have to point out, fellow Canadian. Yep, fellow Canadian. But we were discussing where we're from. I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is out in the west. I was raised Jewish there, or so I thought until I moved to New York. Maybe I was raised Protestant because my Puerto Rican neighbor is so much more Jewish than I am. It's compelling. And yeah, I actually am not I'm not an American citizen yet. I'm just on a green card. I'm still dating America or something. But I have an anchor baby, so that's, at least I have that. But it does, because I've just had a green card, so I can't vote yet. Please, everybody do that job. And I know Canada will be building their own wall, but I'm sure it's all going to be fine. And but in my household, so I've been with my husband for 10 years, but we haven't spent this much time together until recently because now we have a baby. And it turns out that he is just okay, but no, he's a great guy, but it's intense as we get in fights, and I'll be like, could you just put your stuff away? And he'll be like, I'm gonna get you deported, It's hilarious. And I went back recently to Calgary to bring the baby to see my baby's my son. I have a boy. He's a boy for now, and I took him to Canada. I took him to Calgary. Now Calgary, it's a fine place. It's grown a lot in the last decade because of the oil. When I grew up there, it really did feel like a cow town. It felt like it was just like oil and ranchers, a little kind of lowbrow, not a lot of alternative life or art or culture. And I have friends that still live there. Obviously, they've changed. But when I moved, I felt like a lot of people were like, oh, you moved. Like, it insulted them almost. That's the kind of town it is. And then I saw them when I went back home, and someone that I know from high school actually said to me, you think you're so much better than us because you moved? And I was like, no, I always thought I was better than you. Yeah. Always. Lester, do you play somewhere where people can see you outside of this gig? Good gig, right? You don't remember? Because the calendar is too full? Playing constantly? Really? A lot. Where are you anytime in the next month, just to throw it out, just so I know? I'm going to hire you a PR person. Facebook. Lester St. Louis on Facebook. Thank you. I know, actually, I was thinking when Judith was mentioning the pegs, the more pegs we had, the more popular. I was like, oh, I think it's like likes now on Facebook, right? That's how I know if I'm a good parent. Likes. Our final storyteller, when I asked her, what is your advice for someone that's just coming here? She said, it's very easy. Live it, love it, be present. It goes by very, very, very fast. And don't be afraid to put on different hats. Who you are at the beginning might be different from who you are at the end, and you should not be afraid to explore that. That is some good words from the class of '96. Please welcome our final storyteller, Jamil Higley.
So have you ever raised your hand in class and you raise it so fast because you want to participate, but you don't actually have an answer, and you don't know what you're going to say, and then you get called on? That was me for this event. I got called on. But here's the problem. My 4 years at Barnard were really shitty. And how do I tell that story at reunion? The college was not at all what I expected. So rather than work on my story and dig up the past, I got really busy cleaning out my junk drawer, finding the perfect outfit, over plucking my eyebrows. But now that it's just you, me, and 250 other people, I'll go ahead and share my shitty story. I arrived at Barnard in 1992, and I just graduated from a small and not so diverse private school in Houston, Texas. I never had a boyfriend, I'd excelled at track and field, but most importantly, I'd broken free of my mother's grasp. She was a well-intentioned single parent, but somewhat controlling, and she had some rather sharp thorns. I had assumed when I came to Barnard that it was going to be some feminist amalgamation of a John Hughes coming-of-age film and a United Colors of Benetton ad from the late 80s. I'd found my tribe, right? I'd make lifelong friends, I would attend stereotypical parties, I would travel abroad, I'd have a broken heart, and heck, I could even become the next Margaret Mead. So, I'd gotten a job through the Barnard Babysitting Agency. This is first semester freshman year. And the family had two sweet little girls. They lived on West 86th Street, and it was late at night. I'd already put them to bed, and the phone rang. This was a landline, okay? This is 1992. I pick it up, assuming it's the parents calling to see if the girls are asleep. But it's my mother. How in the world did she even find me, right? So I thought, geez, seriously, couldn't this wait? But no, it couldn't wait. For whatever reason, on that day in that place, she decided to tell me that she had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and she was given a few months to live. So, standing on the other end of that phone, it's like this emotional tsunami just swept in. everything that I had imagined about my future was just decimated, right? She was all I had. I had no siblings and no dad, and my future was just barren. And gone was this young woman who thought she was going to take New York City by storm. I was just an 18-year-old girl, far away from home, scared and treading water. But in that moment, with great courage, Anastasia, my mom, threw me a lifeline. She insisted that I stay at Barnard. She said, "We worked too hard to get you where you are for you to come home now. Besides, I'm gonna beat this thing. I'm going to see you graduate." So Barnard became my raft. I was adrift at sea, and fear was my captain. And I sometimes wonder if I hadn't have been so fearful, or if my mom hadn't have been sick, then maybe I would have majored in something really sexy, like art history. And then I would have found myself living in Paris after graduating and working at an art auction house. Or maybe I would have taken a more practical route, and I would have majored in statistics and had a high-paying job on Wall Street when those existed. But instead, I chose cultural anthropology. And I chose it because it's this beautiful umbrella that encompassed so many topics of interest. And I needed a distraction. And on the freshman reading list, there was a book called The Sexual Life of Savages. So that was my distraction. So where do I go from there? So after that phone call, my memories of college were more like a collage. So I remember riding on the 1-9 train when there was a 9 train. I remember taking classes that I loved, that I thought would kill me. I remember flying back and forth to Houston. I remember Take Back the Night. I can remember my mom being in remission and then her not being in remission. I can remember standing in line for seconds and thirds in the Hewitt cafeteria and just bringing on the freshmen 15 or 20. I can remember her brain tumor. I can remember endless episodes of Friends and ER and Seinfeld. I can remember sitting on the steps. And then there's the last phone call when she said goodbye. My mom passed away 2 months shy of graduation. But she called me from her hospice bed a few days before she died. And for 5 minutes, I had my mom back. She normally was in this drug-induced other world, right? But in these 5 minutes, she told me that she loved me, that she was proud of me, that she knew things had been shitty, and that she was sorry. And then the morphine kicked in, and our conversation turned to butterflies. So on May 14th, 1996, I stepped off my raft. Knee-deep in grief, I walked across the stage and received my diploma. I was a motherless daughter, but I had my degree. And I thought that I was going to be set. I thought that my degree was going to be this golden ticket to clarity and purpose and direction. And at the very least, I would have a job. But that's not how it happened. I had a temp job and another temp job, some lasting weeks, some lasting months. And the fog of grief was so thick that I couldn't see where any of this was taking me. remember how I said things were shitty? They were. But that is what makes the best fertilizer. And incredible things grow from well-fertilized ground, right? And so, while life didn't bloom for me while I was here at Barnard, there were professors that extended grace, but still expected me to show up and get my work done. So that instilled a strong work ethic. There were the classes that I took that sparked curiosity and introspection and critical thinking. There are the friendships that I formed that have spanned 2 decades and thousands of miles. And, you know, originally I didn't want to tell this story because I thought that it was her story. But really, it's my story. It's the story of 18 different jobs, 12 incredible friends that came around and blessed me, 6 really hard forks in the road. I lived in 4 different cities. I'm blessed with 3 daughters, 2 of whom are here. I could one day attend Barnard. A husband that's 5 years younger than I am, but who has adored me since he was 12 years old. And that crazy major, it turns out it wasn't crazy after all. That tree bore fruit. And so I was able to take all of that hardship in my life and all of the good that Barnard planted and turn it into a rewarding career, one that I could not have had upon graduating because I hadn't lived enough yet. But now, with the well-tuned, non-judgmental, observant eye of a cultural anthropologist, I'm a life coach. I walk with people as they swim through their own emotional tsunami. I help them identify their raft and stand strong on their own sea legs. And just last week, my youngest, she's 3, she came into my bedroom. She was awoken from a dream, and she said, "Mama, I'm scared and I'm alone." And I said, "Don't be afraid. I'm right here with you."
Jamil Higley. Woo! Yeah. All right, just gotta get it together. That was incredible. That is our incredible show. I would like to bring all 3 of our storytellers back onto the stage. While they're coming up here, I'd also like to thank the Alumni Association, Matt Hamilton, and the staff at Alumni Relations, Cindy Stivers for that great introduction, the Reunion Moth Committee, our musician Lester St. Louis, the director from the Moth that worked with these storytellers, Catherine McCarthy, and of course, our storytellers. Thank you so much. We loved being here. I know that there's a reception to follow and some great things later on this afternoon. So thank you for spending time with us and have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you.